She filled out the intake form herself. I handed her the clipboard and stepped back to give her space. The way you do when someone is older and proud and would rather struggle for 60 seconds than accept help they didn't ask for. I watched her write slowly, deliberately, the pen moving with the careful patience of a woman who learned to do things right the first time. Then the nurse came to collect the clipboard, and I moved forward, and I caught a glimpse of the top line, the one that said, "Relationship to emergency contact." She had written son, not son-in-law, not daughter's husband, not the polite bureaucratic distance of a man who married into a family 9 years ago and has been quietly accepted ever since. Son, I didn't say anything. She didn't look up, but something shifted in that waiting room. Under the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic and bad coffee, and I have been thinking about it every single day since. This is that story. It starts further back than you'd expect. My name is Daniel Okafor. I'm 36. I manage supply chain logistics for a mid-sized furniture manufacturer, which means I spend my days making sure the right materials arrive at the right place before someone who makes expensive chairs runs out of oak and has a very bad Tuesday. It is not a glamorous job. My mother once introduced me to her friends as the one who works with wood, which is technically accurate, and also the reason I stopped attending her book club dinners. My wife's name is Priya. We met 11 years ago at a trivia night where I accused her team of cheating on the geography round, and she proved, with considerable and specific evidence, that I was wrong about the capital of Burkina Faso. I married her 3 years later. I would do it again under identical circumstances, including the humiliation. Priya's mother is Margaret Chen. She goes by Maggie to everyone except telemarketers and people who have recently disappointed her. She is 67 years old. She taught high school English for 31 years, retired, and has spent the decade since reading everything she was too busy to read while working and correcting the grammar of restaurant menus with a small red pen she keeps in her purse. The pen is a Pilot G2, fine tip red. She has carried one every day for as long as Priya can remember. She is 5'2". She has silver hair she wears in a low bun and reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she pushes up onto her head when she is thinking, and then cannot find for 20 minutes. She drinks her tea with exactly 1 sugar and will notice if you give her 2, not by saying anything, but by the particular quality of her silence, which is its own complete sentence. She told me, within the first month of knowing me, that honesty was more important than comfort. I found this alarming at the time. I have since come to think of it as one of the most useful things anyone has ever taught me. Maggie moved in with us 3 years ago, after Priya's father passed. We converted the guest room. We bought the good mattress. Priya and I discussed it for 48 hours. Maggie discussed it for 0 hours, because it was not, in her view, a question. You take care of your family. The end. The part I hadn't expected, and I say this as someone who came to this family late, without the history that binds people who have lived alongside each other for decades, was how much I would come to love her. Not in a way I named right away, more in the way you notice, slowly, and then all at once, that someone has become essential. The way a habit becomes a ritual. The way you start cooking for 3 without thinking about it and only realize later that you never consciously decided to. The Tuesday it happened was in November, cold, gray. The particular kind of afternoon that makes you feel like the sun has filed for early retirement. Priya was in Chicago for a work conference, 3 days, back Thursday. Maggie and I had our rhythms by then. I made coffee in the morning. She left the newspaper folded to the crossword on my side of the counter. I left it unfinished. She finished it in red pen and left it back. Neither of us mentioned this arrangement. It had simply evolved, the way the best arrangements do, without anyone calling a meeting. I came home at 6 to find her at the kitchen table, not doing the crossword. Just sitting. The kitchen smelled like the soup she'd started and abandoned. The stove was off. Her red pen was on the table beside her, uncapped, which was unusual. Maggie always capped the pen. Her reading glasses were folded next to it, at rest, which meant she'd set them down meaning to get up, and then hadn't. Maggie. She looked up. Her face had that controlled, careful quality I'd learned to read, the face she made when something hurt, and she had already decided she wasn't going to make a scene about it. "I think," she said, "I may have overdone it a little today." Her left hand was resting in her lap at an angle that was not quite right. I was already reaching for my keys. She said, "It's probably nothing." I said, "Okay, let's go make sure." She didn't argue. That alone told me more than the hand did. The drive to urgent care took 11 minutes. She spent the first 5 telling me about a novel she was reading, something set in post-war Vienna, a clockmaker. The particular way the author handled silence as punctuation, with the deliberate, slightly too calm energy of a woman who was not going to discuss the fact that her wrist hurt and she was quietly frightened. I let her talk. I didn't turn the radio on. I drove and listened, and when she paused, asked a question about the clockmaker, so she'd have somewhere to put the next sentence. We checked in at 6:18. The waiting room was half full. She asked for the intake form. I handed it to her with a pen and stepped back and looked at my phone and gave her the privacy of doing it herself. I wasn't trying to see what she wrote. I wasn't even looking. But when the nurse came and I moved forward to ask about the wait time, I caught the top of the form over the edge of the clipboard. Emergency contact. Priya Okafor. Relationship to emergency contact. Son. I sat with that for a long time. Not visibly. Nothing showed. I have spent enough years in supply chain logistics to have developed a convincing neutral face, and I deployed it. But something inside me went very quiet and very still. The way a room goes still just after someone has said something that changes the air pressure. I told myself it was the pain making her hurry. I told myself she'd probably written it by reflex, the way your hand finds a word before your brain has finished selecting it. I told myself son-in-law is technically 2 words, and paperwork doesn't reward precision. I gave myself a thorough and reasonable set of explanations. None of them held. Because here is what I knew about Margaret Chen. After 3 years of sharing a kitchen and a newspaper and a crossword routine, she did not do anything without thinking. She finished crosswords in pen because she was certain before she committed. She corrected restaurant menus in red because precision mattered. She measured the 1 sugar, not because she couldn't trust her eyes, but because she trusted exact things more than approximate ones. If she wrote son, she chose to write son. I am not given to dramatic interior realizations. My professional life rewards the logistics of things, the schedule, the invoice, the container number. But sitting in that plastic chair under fluorescent lights, while a woman who had just filed me on a government form as her son got her wrist examined down the hall, I felt something shift in my chest so quietly that if I hadn't been sitting still, I might have missed it. I have poor survival instincts around small moments that turn out to be large ones. This is a documented personal failing. I started thinking about the other things I had filed away without naming. The way she left the newspaper folded to the crossword specifically on my side of the counter, not the center, not Priya's side, my side. The way at dinner she would sometimes say something like, "Daniel will have noticed this," before making an observation, as if my noticing things was a quality she'd catalogued and trusted. The way she had started, somewhere in the second year, calling me Daniel instead of Priya's Daniel, which was how she'd referred to me in the beginning, with the possessive still attached. Small things. Things that, individually, meant nothing. Things that, sitting in a waiting room at 6:30 on a November evening, formed a shape I hadn't been willing to see before. There was a night, it must have been 8 or 9 months after she moved in, when I had come downstairs at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and found her in the kitchen, also not sleeping, with a cup of tea gone cold and a novel face down on the table. She didn't hear me on the stairs. She was just sitting, her hands around the cup, looking at nothing in particular, with a look on her face I had never seen in daylight. Not sad exactly, just present with something, privately, in the way you are only present with things at 2 in the morning when you believe the house is asleep. I started to back quietly up the stairs, she said, without turning the kettle still warm. I stopped. I know, I said. I just came down for water. She looked at me then. The look was gone, replaced by the usual careful composure. But she gestured at the chair across from her, a small motion, barely anything. An invitation she would not repeat and did not need to. I sat down. I got my water. She drank her cold tea without commenting on its temperature. We didn't talk about why either of us was awake at 2 in the morning, because we both understood that some things are better company than conversation. After maybe 20 minutes, she picked up her novel and said, simply, "Good night, Daniel," and went upstairs. I sat at that table for another few minutes in the dark kitchen, and I thought about how, in 11 years of knowing Priya's family, I had never once sat with her father in silence at 2 in the morning. Not because we didn't get along. We did. But there is a kind of ease that cannot be performed or scheduled. It either exists or it doesn't. I had never put a name to what existed between Maggie and me. I had just been glad it was there. Now, in the waiting room, sitting with the word son, I understood something I hadn't before. The ease had a name. I had simply never looked at the form. I am not a man given to crying in waiting rooms. I want to be clear about that. I sat in my plastic chair and I looked at a fish tank in the corner, which held 3 fish that were doing very little, and I did not cry. I thought about logistics. I thought about the prescription I would need to pick up. I thought about the kind of soup she'd been making, and whether the bones were still in the pot, and whether I should put the pot in the fridge when we got home. But underneath all of that, very quietly, like a frequency you feel in your chest rather than hear through your ears, the word sat there. Son. She had written it the way she wrote everything, without fuss, without performance, with the certainty of someone who had already done the thinking. I decided, in that moment, that I was not going to say anything to her about it, not because I was embarrassed, and not because it didn't matter, but because I understood, from 3 years of paying attention to how Maggie Chen communicated, that acknowledging it out loud would somehow make it smaller. What she had done was leave a door open. You don't thank someone for a door by taking it off its hinges and carrying it around. You walk through it. You just walk through it quietly, and let them know you know by how you show up from now on. The weeks after the urgent care visit were ordinary, on the surface. The wrist was a hairline fracture. Minor. A splint for 4 weeks. Careful movements. Come back if the pain escalated. She listened to the doctor. Asked 2 precise questions. Thanked him. And then, in the car, told me she should have called Priya. I said Priya was in a conference. She said she knew. Then she said, "You don't worry the way she does. You just handle things. It's restful." She looked out the passenger window. That's a compliment, Daniel, in case it didn't land. It landed. I didn't know what to do with it, so I said I'd pick up the prescription on the way home. She said good. We drove in comfortable silence, the kind that had taken 2.5 years to earn. Priya came home Thursday and I told her about the wrist at the airport. Matter of fact, already handled. Prescription filled, splint fitted. Follow-up appointment booked the following Wednesday. She called her mother immediately. I could hear Maggie's voice from the back seat. Calm, faintly amused, the tone of a woman who had anticipated exactly this level of response and was not bothered by it. After dinner, Priya found me doing dishes and stood beside me and put her head on my shoulder for just a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for taking care of her." I said she hadn't wanted to worry Priya. She never does. A pause. "But she called you." I said I knew. I didn't tell Priya about the form. I've thought about why, and the closest I can get is this. Some things feel like they belong specifically to the person who gave them, and sharing them too widely dilutes something essential about the transaction. Maggie had written a word on a piece of paper in a moment of pain and mild fear, in a room where she thought no one was particularly watching. That word was mine to have received. It felt private in the best sense, the sense of something held carefully, not hidden. Over the 4 weeks of the splint, I learned to open jars without making it look deliberate. I moved the kettle to the left side of the counter without explaining why. I shifted the books she was reading to the lower shelf so she wouldn't have to reach. She noticed all of it. I know because of the specific quality of her not mentioning it, which is the Margaret Chen equivalent of a standing ovation. One Saturday morning I came downstairs to find her at the table, crossword open, red pen in her right hand, splinted wrist resting flat on the table. She'd gotten 3 across and 2 down, and was looking at the page with the focused stillness of a woman who was not going to let a newspaper defeat her. 7 letters, she said, without looking up. Second letter is R. Bond formed without words. I poured my coffee. Thought about it. Kinship, I said. She wrote it in. Left-handed, slow, the letters uneven but committed. No hesitation. No second-guessing. Just the word, placed down the way she placed every word. Like she'd already known it was right. She said. She turned the page. I drank my coffee. The kitchen light came in low and sideways, the way it does in November mornings, and there was no dramatic music and no moment of looking at each other with dawning recognition. It was just an ordinary Saturday. The word kinship hung in the air, written in red ink by a woman with a splinted wrist, and I thought about how language does that sometimes. How the right word doesn't explain a feeling so much as it confirms that the feeling was always real. Nothing had changed, and everything had, in the way that things change when they finally get a name. She never mentioned the intake form. I never mentioned it either. There is a kind of conversation that doesn't require speaking to be had, and Maggie Chen has always understood that better than almost anyone I know. You showed her what she meant to you by how you showed up. She showed you what you meant to her by what she wrote when she thought no one was watching. That, I've come to understand, is how some of the truest things get said. 2 years later, Maggie had a planned hospital procedure. Nothing serious. Something she'd been putting off and finally scheduled. I drove her. The hospital had its own forms. This time I was standing right beside her when she filled them out, because she'd handed me her tea to hold while she wrote. I watched her reach the emergency contact line. She wrote Priya's name. She reached the relationship line. She wrote son. Then paused for just a moment. Then added, in parentheses, in that careful, deliberate hand, I looked at the window. The parking lot was gray and completely unremarkable. I held her tea very carefully so that she would not see my face for a few seconds. She took the cup back. Still warm, she said. Good, I said. She looked up at me over her reading glasses, which were, for once, where they were supposed to be. "You're a good son," she said, simply, without ceremony. The way she said all the things that mattered, as if they were just facts she was noting for the record, things that had always been true and simply needed stating. I said, "You're a good mother." She made a small sound that was almost a laugh. "That's a low bar. You clear it by a considerable distance," I said. She looked down at her tea. The smallest real smile moved across her face, the kind she kept close and only let out when something had genuinely earned it. The G2 pen clicked as she capped it and dropped it back into her purse. Years later, when people ask about us, and people do ask, because apparently a son-in-law and a mother-in-law who genuinely like each other is considered remarkable and requires an explanation, Priya tells the urgent care story. She tells it the way you tell stories that belong to someone else, carefully, leaving space at the important parts for the people who are actually there. Maggie's version is shorter. She says, "He didn't fuss. He just handled it. What more do you want to know?" My version is the one I have never said out loud until now. My version is this: that in a waiting room under fluorescent lights, a woman wrote one word on a form she thought I wasn't reading, and that word did something quiet and permanent to something in my chest. She wrote "son," not as a gesture, not for my benefit. She wrote it because it was what was true. In the only moment that ever really reveals what's true, the moment when you're in pain and you're tired and you're not performing anything for anyone, and the word comes out before you can replace it with something more careful. She showed you what you meant to her in the edges of things, in the word she chose when she thought no one was watching, in the crossword answer she already knew, in the tea she handed back while it was still warm. Nothing important had appeared overnight. It had simply stopped hiding. And I think that is the best way to find out you belong somewhere. Not in a declaration, not in a ceremony. Quietly, in red ink on a clipboard, in a room where you thought no one was looking.